side by side with us. So its intent, the intent is for us to be able to work together, those elected officials and non-elected officials. But it's not intended for non-elected officials to take over the organization. Always remember that this is a mayor's organization, which provides an opportunity for non-mayors and other non-elected officials to be involved. Okay? And if you notice also in the World Conference of Mayors, this is an organization where everyone is equal. Everyone is honorable, and we respect everyone. We do not, in the World Conference of Mayors, come to meetings to argue or bicker or be disrespectful for one another, to each other. You have that kind of excitement in city council meetings and in local meetings back home. But when you come to the World Conference of Mayors, the decorum is like the United Nations. We are the United Nations of cities, and we conduct ourselves accordingly. Okay, now after Mayor Gardner, we will have Mayor Ed Jones. He's going to do it virtual. Sandra Ross is in the headquarters back there, in the control room, and she'll control that. Mayor Jones is around. And then, hopefully, Emily Ramon Nakumbo. Virgin. Oh, you? Okay, so which country? He's from Cameroon, but I have Nakumbo on the trip because he's the president of the Association of Mayors. Okay? So when you and Mayor Jackson come up, you will recognize all of the applicants. And we also have the diplomatic corps here. I'm not sure. You had something? All right. So the reason why we're going through this morning is because we want to get it all done by 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock when they kick off. We're going to get the national straight. So we got about 45 minutes. Okay. And at 10 o'clock, here we go again. We have the pastor of the church will actually be here, and he will give a welcome to the church. We have the chairman of the board for the Association of Eatonville, the mayor of Orange County, and Regina Hill, commissioner from the city of Orlando, and then this M.B. theory was trained on the reading on the Association of Eatonville Community. She has two keynote speakers, Dr. Chambliss and Bruce Chambers. That gets us through the morning. And then after that, we want to gather for, this is an historic occasion. We want to gather for one group picture. Okay? All right. That's the session. Any questions? Yes. accent? All right. You right now. Dr. Benny? Any other questions? Well, good. You're active in OGA, the United Local Government Authorities. So if we do not get the president, demonstrated reading because this organization represents at least 14,000 mayors and other elected.
Are you also in
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm the descendant of
Well, good.
my
Welcome.
grandfather donated
Oh,
the Eatonville.
outstanding. You go over and sit with your mayor. Let's give her a hand. Thank you so much. So we have not started the session yet. We're just practicing.
Talk in the microphone.
Turn it off.
Talk in it.
Talking. I'm just essentially talking to those who are on program.
We still at the here for the camera.
He's just testing. You want to test?
We need to talk to the camera.
Test.
You started streaming?
Mm-hmm. It started at 9 o'clock.
Okay, it's the streaming now.
Mm-hmm.
They already streamed. What time is it? Everyone turn to the person next to you and say good morning and smile. And give yourselves a round of applause. For all of the people in the rear, come up to the front. Come on, I want all of you. Because if you come up to the front, under the seat may be a ticket to Disney World. Come on up front as many as possible. Come on up front. It is my honor to call to order the convening session of the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance and the World Conference of Mayors. We're going to follow the agenda as presented, and we're going to ask our president, the Honorable Alberta McCoy, come forth and greet you on behalf of the Historic Black Towns and Settlements, and we're going to follow the program as printed. Let's give her a round of applause. And the Honorable Alberta McCoy, Mayor of the Historic Town of Washington.
Good morning to each and every one of you. Truly, this is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. I greet you in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. It is certainly an honor to be here and greet you this morning. As you read through your program, you see in terms of the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance, how we were organized. And therefore, if you recall, I met you in Atlanta at your National Conference of Black Mayors, and Bruce Mount and I had an intention of meeting, and we went and found me a board and told him, Mayor Ford and Bruce Mount had already had a meeting. And Mayor Ford said, let's get it done. And so Mayor Ford called a meeting in Tuskegee, and of course I was at that meeting, and we organized under Mayor Ford's leadership. And I can't thank Mayor Ford enough for the leadership that he provides for us and how he is training all of us under his leadership to be great leaders such as he has been to us, not only in the state of Alabama, but as you can see, all over this world. And for those of you who have traveled many miles to be with us here this morning, we greet you, we thank you for coming. We hope that we get to meet you, get to know your name. We see you, and we see each other, and we want to continue the leadership that has been established and all of the great things that can be done as we go back to our respective towns. We go back knowing that we are not alone, that we stand with you and that you stand with us, and all that we endeavor. My counterpart of that, Mayor Gardner, thank you so much for opening up your heart and this community to us, for us to continue the work that was started so long ago. So we thank you so very much.
And Madam Mayor, would you be kind enough to lead us in a prayer, please, ma'am?
Let us pray. All wise and eternal God, Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity that you kept planes in the sky and kept cars on the road, watched over us and guided us to this destination. Now, Heavenly Father, we ask that you will open blind eyes and open deaf ears so that we may hear and see each other, and so that we may learn, and so that we may grow, and so that we may love and respect and honor each other and each other's culture, where we come from, where we're trying to go. Lord, we thank you. Your word says the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. So, Lord, we ask that you continue to order our steps. And, Lord, we ask that you bless this organization. Give us the resources that we need to continue wherever we are. Because you said in your word that you would provide for us out of your abundance. So, Lord, we look to you for all that we need. And we ask that you continue to cover us, hide us in your bosom, until whatever storm it is that passes over. Bless this world and let us not worry about the upcoming election, because we know that you are God who sits high and look low. And Lord, just as you led your children out of Egypt, you're going to lead us in whatever direction we need to go. So Lord, we just thank you. We ask that you continue to bless us and keep us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. And let's again show our appreciation to the President of the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance, the Honorable Mayor Alberta McCord. Give her a hand. We are together.
Thank you so much.
Now we are ready for Commissioner Eames is not with us yet, but let's give him a hand anyway because he is the chair of our commission committee. The Honorable Samuel Eames, former commissioner and former mayor pro tem of Orlando, Florida, chairs our conference host committee. He's also our World Conference of Mayors Vice President of Trust. In the World Conference of Mayors, we have 7 vice presidents, in addition to our Vice President of International Affairs, whom you will meet next, and our Vice President of Africa. We have the 7 T's: Vice President of Trust, Trade, Tourism, Technology Transfer, Twin Cities, Treasury, and Training. And each of those vice presidents have a responsibility in the World Conference of Mayors to lead their respective committees on those in that particular subject area. Now we're ready to ask the Honorable Mayor Angie Gardner, the mayor of the great city of Eatonville, Florida. Eatonville, the town that freedom built. Give the mayor, stand on your feet as a matter of fact, and let the mayor know how to do it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm to Mayor McCord, always good to see you. Honorable Mayor Ford. It is a pleasure. Mayor Ford chose the town of Eatonville this year. I don't know if this has ever happened before, but I want to say that I'm so grateful for you being here. I also want to bring you greetings on behalf of the council and of the citizens of this lovely and beautiful town. A town that was built on the collaboration of freed men. So it is quite fitting that you collaborate here, because collaboration brings about change. And that is what makes the world go round. So thank you so much. If there's anything that we can do, please reach out during your stay here, and I just hope you enjoy yourself.
Let's give the mayor another round of applause. Since we're in the South, we're going to have a hot, home-cooked breakfast on Saturday morning prepared by the town of Eatonville. Now we're ready. Mayor Ed Jones, is he with us from the control room? If he is not, I want all of us to give a round of applause to the Honorable Ed Jones, the former mayor of Branson, Louisiana, the home of Branson University, and Ambassador Williams, your alma mater, right? We have a Grambling graduate, Grambling and Prairie View, two of the Prairie viewers here. Oh, yeah. They have friendly competition between the two. Commissioner Ames just came in. We passed you on the program, but since you're here, and you were not here for the beginning, so you could come up and briefly greet everyone. We're being very, very brief this morning because of our time schedule. But the Honorable Samuel Higgs, I've already told them how great thou art and how hard he has worked as chair of our committee. So if you could just briefly welcome everyone. The mayor just finished welcoming us. Now the Honorable Samuel Higgs.
Thank you, the Honorable Mayor Johnny Ford. We just thank everybody for being here today, and we're so happy that you're here, and we're thankful for our African delegation, our members, our friends, and everyone that's here. This is a wonderful time. Mayor McCory, we say good morning to you, and my good brother, Mayor, what's your name now? Mayor Gardner from Pritchard, Alabama. Pritchard is just outside of Mobile, Alabama, and that's where my mother's mother is from, Mobile, Alabama. So we're thankful and good to see you, Mayor Jackson, and there he is, Mayor Allen, and where is Dr. M.B. Oh, there he is, right. And Alistair Coward with, is he here? Not quite yet? All right. So I know I'm taking up a lot of your time, but I just want to say, Father, thank you that we are together and that we are one with the World Conference of Mayors and the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance. We are a great people, and we can be an even greater people when at times we disagree, but yet we come back to find that common cause and that we agree. Because it is not about us, but it is about the people of the world and the people of our communities. So thank you so very much. God bless you, God keep you, and we know we're going to have a great conference, Mayor Ford.
Yes, sir. Give him another round of applause. The Honorable former Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioner for active mayors and active council members and former elected and appointed officials. Anyone who wishes to serve and be a part of the World Conference of Mayors, we have 4 categories of membership. Active membership is for those who are mayors and elected and appointed officials and members of the board. We have the honorary for those who make up the diplomatic corps, our ambassadors and others. We have the other category, the advisory membership for those who wish to advise us, give us technical assistance and support. And then lastly, we have youth. We want to make sure that we pass on this organization to our future leaders, and that's why the World Conference of Mayors, much of the work that we do is train elected officials who are presently elected officials, and we train future mayors and council members and presidents and commissioners and legislators, because we are made up of representatives from all of those groups. So that is why we say that this is a collaboration training conference, because you can never ever get too much training. It's a constant process for all of us. Now we're ready for greetings to be brought from, Ed Jones is not with us. We want to go down to recognize the Honorable Eatonville Gross Ramon Nakumbo, who is the present president of the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa. A couple of years ago, I had an opportunity, along with NY Theory and a number of others from the United States, to go to Morocco to attend their annual conference. And let me tell you something, mayors and elected and appointed officials. It was astonishing to see more than 8,000 mayors and elected officials from across Africa for that meeting in Morocco. The Organization of Local Government Authorities is a powerful organization because it represents elected governments all over Africa, And I am so happy that the present president is the mayor of Blvd, Central African Republic, which is the sister city to the city of Tuskegee, Alabama. Tuskegee has 7 sister cities: Blvd, Soweto, Davidtown, and I could go on and on. Cities that we have entered into twin city relationships with from around the globe. And it is historic, the fact that the president of the local authorities organization of all of Africa is the president of Blvd, and Tuskegee, our city, is the sister city or twin city to that organization. So we are going to be working close together. I'm going to ask the Honorable Mayor Frank Jackson to join me at this particular time, and who is our Vice President of International Affairs. Let's give him a round of applause. Frank and I have been working together for the last 10 years or more, and when I couldn't go to Africa not too long ago, I asked him to go and lead the delegation. If you notice, I used to be happy to go to all these places, but as you get older, I'm so happy that I've got young men that I can sit in my place. Seriously, we're going to ask Dr. Abdullah Bing to come as well. Let's give him a round of applause. He's our hard-working Vice President for Africa, and he does an outstanding job. He's also the director of the John Smith Institute of Training, named in honor of John Smith, our first Secretary General and former mayor of the great city of Pritchard, Alabama. and he's also the director of our African office in Senegal. And I'm going to also, before these two speak, I'm going to ask our Vice President, the Honorable Mayor Jimmy Gardner, to join us now. Let's give him a round of applause. He is the mayor of Pritchard, Alabama, the home of Africa Town, and he'll tell you what's significant about that. But what's important about this is that Pritchard and Tuskegee were the two original towns that got all of this started. Pritchard, Alabama, with Mayor John Smith at that time, and yours truly. We worked hand in hand. And now we have Mayor Gardner, who is carrying on. And I'm looking forward to him serving as our president. I just want to be the founder. I'm going to let you do all the running around. He's a former chief of police, too, so I'll be in good hands. But we're going to let him bring greetings first, and then we're going to turn it over to our internet.
Good morning. First, giving honor to God on behalf of the World Conference of Mayors, we extend our warmest greetings. Our rich inheritance and enduring legacy serve as a testimony to the resilience and the spirit of humanity. We celebrate our unique contributions to our shared history and look forward to fostering continued collaboration and preservation for generations to come. We are together, and may God bless us.
You all stay with us because we want this picture. Okay, the Vice President of International Affairs for the World Conference of Mayors, the Honorable Mayor Frank Jackson.
Good morning. First, giving all praise and honor to God. I am extremely honored and deeply honored to be a part of this great gathering. This is something I look forward to every year. And on behalf of those that serve with us on the International Affairs Committee, I bring you greetings and look forward to the great work we have ahead of us. We have representation on that committee from the Western Hemisphere, from Africa, from Asia, and from Europe. And we look forward to working with each and every one that's here, and we're going to have a great conference. So thank you, Mayor Ford, and I would now like to turn it over to the Vice President for Africa, the Honorable Me.
Greetings, assalamu alaikum, bonjour. This is a great day. And when Mayor Ford said that we are the United Nations of City, it means it. And it is real. If you look around, we have 5 countries here: Cameroon, Gambia, Ghana, Senegal, and I think that we might be getting one more by the end of the day. But all I want to say is that under the leadership of Honorable Jolly Ford, Frank Jackson, Honorable Macquarie, Ghana, I'm here just to learn and to serve. But they have given us the opportunity to really express ourselves, but impact this organization. When you say we are honorable, it means it. And I think right now, that bridge that we are talking about between the African American diaspora and the continent is already happening. And we will be impacting life in both ends of the hemisphere. Again, greeting and welcome to Eatonville into the 2024 Conference of Mayors Conference, Collaboration Conference. Thank you. I will bring Mr. Garba Sule, Honorable Garba Sule, from Cameroon. He's the Vice President of all the Cameroon mayors, and then he's also a member of the United African Mayors Association. And his traveling came from Cameroon. He's bilingual. I'm going to let him speak.
Okay, it's true, I'm bilingual, but I try to do both English and French. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Johnny Ford to give us opportunity to be in this conference. By the time that they appointed us member of this conference, Cameroon was very happy. I know that 5 of his children will come to the conference. We are so glad, so happy to be there. Je voudrais aussi, je passe en français pour les autres, traduire tout simplement notre reconnaissance, notre gratitude à M. Denis Ford. Parce que cette conférence, elle a existé, et c'est la toute première fois que le Cameroun soit représenté. Et je voudrais rappeler que le Cameroun est fondateur, il m'a rappelé, avec l'ambassadeur du Cameroun, il était fondateur de cette conférence. Mais c'est sous nous, vraiment Dieu s'est fait ces choses. Depuis 1997, c'est sous nous que le Cameroun est représenté. Représenté avec 5 des services. Représenté par l'instance la plus indiquée, qui est les villes unies du Cameroun. United Cities and Council of Cameroon, which is an association of 374 councils and cities. Thank you, Mr. Denis.
When the king comes, please stand for His Highness. If this was Prince Charles, he's the king now. If this was King Charles, we would certainly be standing up. So when our king from Africa comes, we stand. Give him another round of applause.
Usually when the king comes, we always have the princess. There's a man and princess from Cameroon to come and join us. Traditionally, there's the only one that can be close to the king.
Merci. Je remercie toutes les personnes qui ont pu organiser cette conférence afin que le Cameroun soit représenté comme dit Monsieur le maire en ce jour. Donc, nous prions Dieu Tout-Puissant de nous aider à confectionner ce qu'on a besoin pour que les Amériques et puis l'Afrique soient ensemble pour le bon développement de l'homme noir. Merci, que bon Dieu nous conduise dans les bons résultats. Merci.
I will translate. He's really thanking everyone that has been part of this great organization. And that our work, his division, it was building that bridge between the African American community and the African community. And that we are, as he said, that one, and that we will be together. And he praying that the Lord guide us, that we unite in our heart, unite our people, and work together. Thank you.
You have others to introduce? Okay.
You know, we have the Ghana and yes. We have Honorable Edie Zakaria. He's the chief officer for the Northern Development Authority in Ghana. Yes. And we have Mayor Ibrahim from Cameroon. We have Honorable Edmond from Cameroon. We have Ma Aissatou Jallo from Gambia, and she's a youth activist, and she's also a designer of clothes. She was selected by the Minister of Trade to represent Gambia, and she brought staff also she wants to showcase and be part of the Zora Festival. We have Mr. Malikan from Senegal. He is now the coordinator for building the Borel Memorial in Senegal. And he's here getting the African American community. And we have Mr. E. Bole from Cameroon, but he is a son of Orlando. He's been living here for 20 years. I think that's all we have for now.
Quickly, I want all the mayors to come quickly for the picture so that we are together to show. Come on, half of you on this side and half on this side. And come on, our lady from the Gambia. From Gambia, quickly, move quickly. We're on time, half of you on this side and half of you on this side. All right. I'm glad we have so many. The stage can't hold us. That's a good problem to have. Okay, I don't want to block anyone.
Excellency,
Do we have
Ambassador?
Okay. Excellent. You get it?
Yes.
Okay, you're tall. And I will let Mayor Gardner ask me if I was going to ask her to speak. I said, no, you don't have to speak. But yes, I do. You got to welcome all of these people to Eatonville. You get very good. Give them all another round of applause. Thank you, Mexico crew. I particularly want to express my appreciation to the Cameroon, King, and to you, Mr. Le Maire. Cameroon is so special because when I was organizing the World Conference of Mayors, I was going embassy to embassy in Washington, D.C. And when I went to the embassy of Cameroon, I met the late Paul Bundy, who was your ambassador at that time. And he said, Mr. Mayor, why are you going individually to the embassies? Why don't you ask to be on the agenda of the African Diplomatic Corps, which is comprised of all of the ambassadors? And sure enough, I called the ambassador of Egypt, and he put me on the agenda, and I was able to ask and go before the ambassadors and ask for their support in helping us to organize the World Conference of Mayors way back in 1984. So give another round of applause to Cameroon. We've come a long way. And the lady from the Gambia, 1977, it was in Banjul, the Gambia, where the idea for the World Conference of Mayors was born. So Tuskegee and Banjul, the Gambia, are sister cities. And the two cities are the first two that got together to organize the World Conference of Mayors. So we're happy to have the Gambia here again. Where is, come on, Mr. Mayor from the Gambia, quickly, come quickly and bring greetings on behalf of my sister city, Banjul, the Gambia, one of the best kept secrets in the world. Your beautiful beaches and your, most of all, the beautiful people. And the ancestral home of Alex Hayden.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Everybody. We definitely appreciate what we hear. We thank Dr. Mayor for being the champions of the World Conference of Mayors. I am Honorable Sekou Diawara, the Mayor of the Area Council, the youngest mayor in Gambia. We are definitely very lucky to represent the Gambia. I am here on behalf of all the mayors in the Gambia. I am also the Vice President of the Association of All Mayors in Gambia. Wow. So we have two cards. We have 8 mayors. Yeah, we have 8 mayors. So we definitely appreciate Dr. Venga for also supporting us to be here. We appreciate all the members of the World Conference of Mayors. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I'm going to ask Mayor Riley Evans, the president of the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors, to come quickly, and all of the mayors from Alabama. Come on. Mayor Clark, Robert Clark, and Mr. Mayor, Mayor Gardner, and the Alabama delegation. Quickly, 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 quickly. And this is Mayor Peavy. This is important. report because back in 1972, it was the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors. We held our first meeting, and we started with the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors, which grew into the Southern Conference of Black Mayors. That expanded into the National Conference of Black Mayors, and now we have the World Conference of Mayors, Conference Mondiale des Mayors. But it all started, Mr. Mayor, with the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors. And if you notice, except for Mayor Peavy and I, we're the senior members, but we've got these young men here who are going to help carry on this tradition for us in this World Conference of Mayors. So, Mr. President, come and greet us from the Alabama Conference. Let's give him a round of applause, Mayor Riley Evans.
Thank you. I bring greetings from the state of Alabama on behalf of the Alabama Conference of Black Mayors, President, Vice President Jack Boone. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right. Outstanding. Mr. Mayor, the Mayor Roderick Clark from Union Springs, Alabama. And this is also the town where Mayor John McGowan was elected mayor in 1984. And he is still serving in public office and active in the World Conference of Mayors. He's our Chief Financial Officer. He's the County Commissioner, and he's not here because he's running for Chairman of the County Commission in Bullock County. Go ahead and bring greetings from your historic town.
Good morning, all. I bring you greetings from the city of Union Springs, Alabama. It's a pleasure to be here with my sisters in the roles of leadership. I pray blessings over us all as we continue to guide and lead our communities the way God sees fit. Thank you.
And Mayor Henry Peavy. We got two former chiefs of police up here. I feel real secure. As I said, that's what we do. We train people for leadership in many, many ways. But it's just glad because law enforcement and safety is very, very important to us. Mayor Henry Peavy, give him a round of applause.
Good morning. On behalf of the Mayor and Council of Town President, I bring you greetings. It's an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this organization. It's all due to Mayor Ford. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much. How are we doing on time? Okay, all right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all so much. We're ready now to call the Honorable N.Y. Theory, who has done such an outstanding job with this Zora Festival. Let's give her a round of applause. Matter of fact, let's give her a standing ovation as she comes down front. And we want you to know that we're just proud. That's right, escort the lady up. We're just proud to be in Eatonville, the town that freedom built. And one of your family members was a former mayor of this great city. One more time, the Honorable N.Y. Theory, Director of the Zora Festival.
Welcome, bonjour. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to everyone. I want to make sure that we have observed all the courtesies. Is Commissioner Hill here from Orlando? Right. Madam Commissioner, would you like to say a few words?
Well, good morning. I'm Mayor Pro Tem Commissioner Regina Hill, City of Orlando. And I bring warm greetings on behalf of Mayor Dyer and the entire City Council and the residents of the City of Orlando. And greetings also to you, Mayor Gardner, and thank you for your leadership. But above all, Mayor Ford, words can't express our gratitude for your leadership through the decades, for all that you have done to open up this line of communication, not just here in the States, but abroad. And it just warms my heart to see the motherland in the house. Thank you so much. When I
think about the World Conference of Mayors and everything that you all bring, we can't do it without you. As has been stated earlier, we are together. And if we don't stand together, we fall. So the work that you all are going to be doing this weekend is going to be, I would say, essential for the next generation. You know, we are living in turbulent times, and the urgency is now. Not tomorrow, but now. So I'm just thankful to be amongst each and every one of you all. And I would say, if I can say anything, if I had 10,000 tongues, 10,000 tongues, do not take anything for granted. This work is not done in a silo. It's the collaboration of the willing. So thank you for being willing. Thank you for your sacrifice, because we know leadership is not easy. And most times it's a lonely place. But you continue to go back for the greater good. So I say blessings upon you all as you're here this weekend, but as you go back to your respective places. And I say thank you, NY, for all that you've done to promote health, wellness, but our culture. And so with that being said, Mayor Dyer couldn't be here, but as you all know, he is a great supporter of the World Conference of Mayors. So thank you, and I'm humbled.
I'll ask one other person to come forward before we enter into the next phase of the program. Senator Kevin Matthews, please, from the state of Oklahoma.
Let's give the Senator another round of applause.
I'm so honored to be here. Our governor called our session in a week early, so I got here at 3 a.m. Don't have to leave tomorrow, but I would not miss this opportunity to come and say thank you to NY for her great leadership. I've been meeting with her for the past year. If you've been working with her, I was not a police chief, I was a fire chief. But she's like a military veteran getting things done. Give her a hand. I am so honored to be here with you great leaders around the world. And I definitely want to thank Mayor Ford, who came to Oklahoma, to Boldly, Oklahoma, where I, as the only black man in the city, was able to pass Senate Bill 509 to create the Civil Rights Trail through the state of Oklahoma, through the 13 original black towns, and work with those people from Florida, as well as NY, to now look at us being able to create the U.S. Civil Rights Trail through our black town across the country, and now we can connect to mayors across the world. If we unite, and if we continue to collaborate and work with black excellence and bring those best practices forward and create an organized system, because in the state of Oklahoma, tourism is the third largest revenue driver in the state. When we passed legislation where we raised $30 million to create Greenwood Rising that told the story of the 1921 race massacre and black history in Oklahoma, it was the seventh best tourist destination in America this past year. So we need to take our historic arguments and create economic arguments for our black history. In states like Florida and Oklahoma, where it's the reddest state in the United States, where they're trying to erase our history, it's our job to come together like this and put together our minds and create economic ways that our history moves forward. Thank you for having me here.
I want to, on a personal note, I want to accept every accolade, everything that you are saying on my behalf, I want to accept it on behalf of my late mother, Ella Augusta Johnson Dinkins. I feel at this point in my life that I am actually channeling her. This is a woman who, if circumstances had been different in the United States, she would have been an outstanding and recognized person. But because of the societal norms, she could only distinguish herself amongst her peers, and that she did. So on behalf of her, I will accept anything that you want to say on my behalf. And I also want to let you know, for those who really understand how things get done, nothing gets done without the cooperation and the support. You cannot lead anything if you do not have people who are willing to work with you. And because we have such a wonderful team, I'm willing to do the work for as long as I can. Having said that, I'm going to ask our Vice President of the Board of Directors, Dr. Tom Hara, to stand. Dr. Hara, and be recognized. And now I want to move quickly to the most significant and long-standing relationship that our organization has had in the Central Florida community, and that is with the University of Central Florida. We have been a partner with UCF informally for probably 2 decades or more, but under the leadership of now Dean Emeritus Jose Hernandez, we actually were able to reach a memorandum of understanding. What that means is that the University of Central Florida has entered into a legal working relationship with our organization. And Dean Lyman Brody, to whom I consider my direct report. In other words, in the business, we would call Dean Brody, as Dr. French says, my dean. The University of Central Florida has supported the Zora University Festival financially as well as in kind. And in the business of nonprofit, you know, words are wonderful. Rhetoric is a wonderful thing, but as my late grandmother would say, talk is cheap. It takes money to buy land. And the University of Central Florida has been there. Having said that, I'm going to ask Dean Brody if he will come forward on behalf of the 35th annual Zora University Festival of the Branson.
It's not often I get a chance to be in the pulpit, so I'm happy to be here. It's a great day for us all here in Central Florida. As NY said, you know, we've been partners actually since the beginning. This started with Catherine Seidel as dean, I think it was in 1988, when we had our first actual partnership and conference, and now it's been formalized. So, you know, we're just really happy to be here. You know, and I'm really happy to have this collaboration with all of our dignitaries from Africa and the Council of Mayors. It's really a great privilege to be part of this wonderful few days of collaboration and cooperation, and mostly a lot of learning. And I hope you all look forward to this weekend and soak it all up, because this is a rare occasion that we're all in the same room at the same time with the same purpose. So this is a great occasion for all of us to be here, and we may talk along the way, and I hope I get a chance to meet every one of you in the room and share at least a greeting and a time. In fact, when we were introducing the contingent from Africa, I was looking up my DNA, and I said, let me see, I do have some Cameroon, I have a lot of Nigeria, you know, I have a little Bantu, and interesting things. So I'm looking forward to sharing some time with everyone here. So on the greetings on behalf of Dean Moore, Jeff Moore, my boss, and I want to welcome you all to this conference, well, multiple conferences, I should say, actually, at the same time that's going on. And I just wish you a wonderful weekend. So thank you so much for being here.
Before Dr. Scott French comes forward, I want to acknowledge that Congressman Matt Bill, Frost, Representative Peggy Gustav is here. Ms. Gustav, would you like to bring greetings?
Oh no, I just wanted to yes, thank you so much everyone for being here this morning. Here in District 10.
Just very quickly, thank you so much for acknowledging the office of Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost. You're a U.S. Congressman here, representing the historic town of Eatonville. We are so proud to be here and to be part of this conference. And j'ai deux à dire, bienvenue.
With that now, we will begin the actual Afrofuturism Conference proceedings. Dr. Scott French, if you will come forward and begin that segment of the program. I would be remiss, as you say, not to acknowledge the fine cooperation of Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church and our ability to host this event. I also want to ask one of the presidents to stand. Speak Hackler, please, direct descendant of the Robert Hubbard family.
Thank you, Dr. Theory. Morning, everyone. My name is Scott French. I'm an associate professor of history and director of public history at the University of Central Florida. And I'd like to second the shout out to my dean, Lyman Brody, because he really has supported this 5-year Afrofuturism cycle in every way you can imagine. So thank you, Dean Brody. On behalf of the Zora Festival Academics Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the 35th season of the Zora Festival and the 5th and final year of our 2020-2024 Afrofuturism cycle. The Academics Committee works behind the scenes throughout the year to plan and execute this conference. At present, we have 11 members, each of whom I'd like to acknowledge by name and affiliated institution. Julian Chambliss is Professor of English and Val Berryman Curator of History at Michigan State University and the curator of the Afrofuturism cycle, and you'll be hearing from him in just a minute. Anna Lilius is Professor of English at the University of Central Florida. Trent Domingo is Professor of Humanities at Seminole State College of Florida. Clarissa West White is a reference librarian and instructor at Bethune-Cookman University. Walter Grayson is the DeWitt Wallace Professor and Chair of the Department of History at McAllister College, also presenting later this afternoon, so join us at 1:30 at the Benton Johnson Community Center. Aman Mathiri is an Associate Professor in the Department of Languages and Literature at Johnson C. Smith University. Jason Gregory is a lecturer in the Department of English at the University of Central Florida. Michelle Cohen-Gibbs is an Assistant Professor and Head of the BA Program in Theater Arts at Illinois Wesleyan University. Christopher Peace, Department of English, is a PhD, Department of English from the University of Kansas, is a postdoctoral fellow at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And finally, Sydney Rose McCall, one of our associate members, is a PhD candidate in the Department of History at the College of William and Mary. And a number of these folks will be presenting over the next 2 days. So we'll have a chance to introduce them in more depth. But I'd like to thank them all for their service on the Academics Committee. We meet throughout the year, and this is the big day for us. It all begins today. So in addition to the work of the Academics Committee, I'd like to acknowledge the behind-the-scenes efforts of the UCF Public History Support Staff, Jesse Goldman and Katarina Monroe, who are currently over at the Denton Johnson Community Center setting up for this afternoon's program. And finally, I'd like to give a big merci to Marie Uri, an MA candidate in our history department at UCF. Marie is a native French speaker who, on very short notice, translated Bruce James's talk and PowerPoint for today's presentation. And I just want to give a shout out. She has a book coming out based on her thesis and the memoir of her grandfather. We're very excited to see our students really doing so well. We really are grateful for all that they contribute to this conference. Unfortunately, Marie did not have time to translate our first speaker's talk. It is translated, but not by Marie. But I'm sure she would have enjoyed it in both English and French. And now I get to introduce our keynote speaker and curator of the Afrofuturism Cycle. Julia Chambliss is a professor of English with an appointment in history and the Val Berryman Curator of History at the Michigan State University Museum. He is also a core participant in the MSU College of Arts and Letters Consortium for Critical Diversity in a Digital Age Research, or CEDAR as it's called. His research interests focus on race, culture, and power in real and imagined urban spaces. His recent writing has appeared in the American Historical Review, Phylum, Frieze Magazine, Redwood Review, and Boston Review. An interdisciplinary scholar, he has designed museum exhibitions, curated art shows, and created public history projects that trace community, ideology, and power in the United States. Dr. Chambliss, as I mentioned, is a member of the academics community, but he's also on the national planners for the festival and has been working on this cycle for 5 years. He's stepping down after today, and so it's a sad moment for all of us. We're extremely grateful for the work he's put into conceptualizing and implementing this event, from the first year's opening question, what is Afrofuturism, to this year's focus on Afrofuturism in space. The title of his talk today is The Hungerford Legacy and the History of Black Futures. Please give him a warm welcome.
Well, I'm not going to die or anything, so I'm going to 6 steps down. It feels like this is the end of an era. Those slides relate to my talk. Before I get to that, I want to say a little bit about the cycle. In particular, Scott points out, this has been a 5-year journey for us as academics. I want to thank the PEC, Association of the Legal Community. When I first proposed Afrofuturism, it was not something that was commonly understood as a narrative. And in fact, one of the things that became very important was their willingness to sort of think beyond the boundaries. In many ways, the conversations we've had here over the last 5 years have really been definitional in helping a broad public understand what Afrofuturism is. All the scholars who have contributed to these talks present their work have done so with the idea of supporting some level of mission and vision is at the core of Eatonville as a Black space and a town that freedom built. Our speakers have been varied and accomplished, but at this last moment, I really want to talk about the fact that we did have Angel Vez here, who recently passed away. He was a scholar of African diasporic spaces, wrote about Black spaces in South and also South Africa. He was a huge fan and admirer of the person and the work of the PEC. So having him here back in 2021, talking about the vision of Afrofuturism, is really one of the things that was a special moment for us. We really want to acknowledge his contribution and his passing. It's a real loss for all the scholars who think about Black spaces and Black culture. As I think about the end of this cycle, I am proud. I take all the blame and some of the credit related to how it all turned out. Obviously, this was an opportunity for us to help the public sort of integrate things they understood in relation to Black people and Black spaces into a broader set of conversations about person. As I said at the very beginning, if you think about what Afrofuturism is, if you think about the work of Zoe Person, she's an Afrofuturist. She advocated for thinking about Blackness and thinking about Black culture in a way that's positive, transformative, and uplifting. Ultimately, all Afrofuturist narratives have that same goal, not one of thinking about Blackness in the sort of ways that whiteness would want to contaminate and shape it as a negative thing. We recognize the contribution to transformative effects.
This last conversation in the cycle, what is the space of Afrofuturism? I have to really admit, every year when I think about the theme that year, I think of it as a question, I think about the program as the answer. If you don't know what Afrofuturism is, we kind of are obligated to try to tell you. At some very basic level, this is a public humanities project, meaning we're trying to share not with academics, but with the public, important ideas that matter to their world, to their worldview, and to the decisions they make. The question of space is a particular one, though. And I have to admit, it is perhaps the most complex of all the ones that we've covered so far. When I say space, do I mean outer space? If you're a fan of Sun Ra and the work of that early generation of futurists that people recognize, they think about science fiction, they think about what I think of other, they think about Samuel Delaney, they think about the music of Sun Ra, they think about Coltrane Circle and the way that jazz and blues represent the cosmic transformative ideas. Am I talking about inner space, the space of the mind, the ways that we might transform our thinking? In truth, the spaces that we're talking about are both. And perhaps even a third space, that space created by data and technology and the possibility of the self projected into electronic bodies, electronic boxes, and things like that. But we're also talking about very physical spaces. And it's, I think, very appropriate that historic Black town settlement, World Congress of Mayors, Eatonville is the site of the start of that Afrofuturism conference, in part because the Black towns of the late 19th century were spaces that were imagination engines for African Americans seeking to tell a story that was different from the one being perpetrated by society at the time. They were projections into the future that advocated for transformation, liberation, and uplift. So my conversation today is really not so much as formal paper, because you don't do that, things like this, you don't read your paper. I'm going to talk through some ideas related to contemporary debates in Eatonville, because they have become, I think, at some level, a kind of full circle set of conversations. What is it that the people wanted to do when they created Eatonville? And when you think about the current debates about Hungerford property, how does that fit into that sort of legacy of imagination and spatial transformation that's so important? So the title of my talk is The Hungerford Legacy and the History of Black Futures. And my first question, do I get a clicker? Actually, that just occurred to me. Am I clicking? All right. My first question is, what's at stake in the debate about the Hungerford School property in Eatonville in Central Florida? And I always want to start this question by creating some context around the history of African Americans, especially during the Civil War. So the next thing that you see here is a classic image associated with that period. This is from Thomas Nash, who's a very important figure in the history of visual culture in the United States. He was a cartoonist and illustrator for Harper's Weekly. And this is a classic image that he created called Emancipation. As you'll know, at the center of this picture is Abraham Lincoln. Now, the problem with this picture, of course, is that if you're looking at this and you're a white person, you think, oh, Lincoln did all these great things to try to help black people, because the history of black people is sort of told in the narrative of this image. But the reality is that black people are an important part of their own liberation idea. But the politics of the mid-19th century, especially the politics of Reconstruction, really are at odds with the sort of agency offered by African Americans. When we think about radical Reconstruction, I'm sure that's image, we're talking about Republicans who are imagining a post-Civil War society in the South and are relying very heavily on African American participation in the political system. This radical Reconstruction was radical in part because they hoped for a Reconstructed society. Next slide, please. That Reconstructed society required African American participation. At the same time, the primary question on the minds of white people in the North and in the South is, what is this nature of black citizenship going to be? Are black people going to be, in fact, citizens like white people, or are they going to be something completely different, secondary
in all ways, no matter what. As we can see, when we look at the sort of ideas of the period, if we're looking at African Americans in the South, any idea of a Reconstruction society, next slide please, really calls attention to the fact that if African Americans have full participation, they represent a transformative force in the possibility of politics and social order. As these Black maps from the 19th century show, next slide please. African Americans would be key figures in any kind of new Reconstruction society. And Florida is a prime example of this. If you look at a figure like Joshua Walls, next slide please. Walls is a Reconstruction era politician who was elected, and he really captures many of the same ideas that we associate with many of the Black politicians that were elected in the aftermath of the Civil War. These were reform-minded politicians that sought to make the Southern system more equitable, to make it serve people in a way that allowed for education, public services, and the uplift of everyone, not just simply Black people. And they demanded that the government, as sort of operated, achieve these sort of outcomes that we associate with like a liberatory democratic society. Alas, their efforts ran into the reality of white supremacy. And as this image, next slide please, shows, these African Americans had to contend with the extra-legal resistance of white Democrats and the eventual overturning of their efforts to reconstruct society. Next slide please. The redeemed South, as is so referred to in the history books, is not redeemed in any way that's meaningful or good, but redeemed in a way that white supremacists could assert control and eliminate the vision of freedom and liberation articulated by African Americans. So, how does the end of Reconstruction set up the sort of journey towards the creation of these sort of Black freedom spaces? Next slide, please. This is a question I think is very important to sort of situate Eatonville and ultimately the spaces that it represents. In the aftermath of Reconstruction, which is the definitive period that we talk about in history books, and I have to admit, my students always complain, especially my Black students, if you read the history books in the United States, there's slavery, there's Reconstruction, there's Jim Crow, and then that's it. But in reality, there's a much more greater set of complexities at the end of Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow is really at the center of what Eatonville represents. I'm particularly interested in the idea that in the aftermath of Reconstruction, Black people are active and not just simply reactive. Next slide, please. Those reactions are very well known, and for the history of Black studies and Black culture, we know that African Americans involve themselves in multiple kinds of techniques in response to this sort of transformation. There's the exodustral movement, where they move to places like Kansas. There's the Return to Africa movement, next slide please, which is a recurring theme in African American experience. Obviously, displaced from Africa, many African Americans were often engaged with both materially and ideologically with a return to Africa. And this it has a sort of cyclical nature to it. Sometimes those efforts to return to Africa are driven by white people who want to get rid of free Black people, but many times African Americans of different stripes are interested in the idea of return to Africa. And the same is true at the end of Reconstruction. And then, of course, as I say, next slide please, there is the creation of Black towns in places like Kansas, and next slide please. Those efforts represented an important part of Black people seizing their opportunity to be mobile in a period where they've been given freedom, but were facing these sort of restrictive realities. In Florida, this is the story of those people who stayed behind. And I turn my attention to T. Thomas Fortune, who is one of the figures who has gained a lot more notoriety in recent years because he was a character featured on the HBO series The Blvd Age. But Fortune was originally from Florida. His father was a Reconstruction era politician, and he wrote very extensively about the Black experience before he started his work in New York. Next slide, please. Fortune was very clear, much like cultural critics today, in analysis today, that the problems of black people and the problems of poor white people are actually the same problems. And in his classic work, Black and White, he talked about the need for us to recognize the sort of like class-based tensions. But at the core of the sort of oppression associated with this era, we do see that it is pitting the poor black person and the poor white person against each other, and using violence to reinforce that kind of confrontation was central. So the idea that we see here in 1883, a mob of white people killed a black man for his willingness to work for cheaper wages is really part of a broader system of control and oppression. Another part of that system, next slide please, is a return to a kind of quasi-slave system in the form of a convict lease system. And this involved the criminalization of black people in public spaces in the late 19th century. Obviously, books like Slavery by Another Name call attention to the ways that black people could be arrested for things like bankruptcy, and then through a series of trumped-up charges kept in perpetual bondage. That bondage, in turn, became fuel for the economic transformation of the New South. Next slide, please. This labor created the railroads that were part of the quote-unquote modernization of the post-Civil War period in the New South. It helped create the industries that were so important to this period. Next slide, please. Florida's convict lease system was notoriously harsh. The writing here is quite well known. The punishments for Florida people who were arrested and placed in convict lease systems were extensive, with abuse to their bodies and their minds, and the extension of their convict period from seemingly vaguely charged of 30 days could easily stretch into many years. And it was something that was noted at the time, and really becomes a black mark that we really fully haven't talked about enough in the context of the contemporary period. Next slide, please. Oh. So, obviously African Americans were not just sitting around just thinking, they are on the move. And it is actually the movement of black people, first from the land to the cities in the South, and then out of the South, that creates much of the social tension associated with this period. We've read, and people have written extensively about the concerns that white people have about the loss of black labor in this period. But black people are also staying, and black people are also creating sort of spaces of resistance and community. And that's the next part of the story that's so important. This creating these black counterpublic, places where black people are going to articulate, pursue, and envision the future, are really pivotal to understanding our contemporary landscape. Next slide. These spaces were central to creating a kind of political, social, and economic system that allowed black people to endure what historians often call the nadir of the 1880s and 1890s. They relied on kinship, they relied on communication, they relied on cooperation. Many of the same ideas that animate the organizations that you are meeting here right now. These organizations also help to funnel resources in the creation of institutions that wanted to tell a different story about the black experience. It's important to recognize that they were involved in an ideological struggle, especially they were involved in a political struggle. And the ideology of the time, and the ideology that was sort of defined, I would argue, Eatonville and many of the black towns, was really attached to Booker T. Washington. Next slide, please. Washington is, of course, the most famous African American of the late 19th century. He's a pivotal figure, sort of stretching back to that period, the period before and into this sort of modern period where we see the rise of new set leadership like it does in the boys. Washington is notorious in the history books in part because he's associated with something called the Atlanta Compromise. And that speech, though, is actually more complicated and his ideology more fluid than people give him credit for. Next slide. This is a picture of the Atlanta Compromise. Next slide. Washington is famous for Up From Slavery, which is his autobiography. He actually wrote many books. One of them, working with the hands, he makes clear his philosophy around working with white people. It's important to recognize that when Washington gave a speech, even if it was a speech in a room like this, there would be black people on that side of the room, there would be white people on this side. If you read the newspapers from that speech, the white people were heard one thing, the black people heard a different thing. What Washington always said was he was willing to work with white people to get resources necessary for the uplift of black people. And his philosophy, as he says here, work with hands, is a pragmatic one. What is it that black people know? They know the land, and therefore I need to give them skills associated with that process so they can sustain themselves and move forward. He was very clear in his goals, but never actually clearly understood by his white allies. For those people who followed Washington in Florida, they actually thought themselves as constructionists, meaning they were constructing something that will allow for their community to persist into the future. They did not think of themselves as segregationists, they did not think of themselves as sort of accepting segregation. They really thought of themselves as constructing those institutions that will allow black people to strive. It's in that vision that Eatonville sits very, very, very central. Because Eatonville is one of those places that Washington talks about in his writings as an example of the kind of constructionist philosophy in action. Next slide. Washington ran a university called Tuskegee. That university graduated a number of graduates who went across the South and set up schools that were basically mini Tuskegees. These normal industrial schools became sort of gateways to interact with Washington's philosophy, and it became points of contact for the support network of philanthropy that Washington developed. The Hungerford School is founded by one of Washington's graduates, R.C. Calhoun. And this school becomes a major sort of hub in the sort of Washingtonian landscape, what I sometimes refer to as the Tuskegee universe. We know this because every one of these institutions produced booklets and annual letters and had supporters across the United States. And Hungerford School in particular is one that garnered a lot of attention because it was in Eatonville, one of the first incorporated black communities. But there were others. Next slide, please. Snow Hill. Next slide. Right. All these institutions provided a kind of infrastructure that was transformative in the sense that they provided almost everything that was required for a kind of economic, political, and social uplift. It's important to recognize while Washington's philosophy is often described as industrial education, what researchers are very quick to point out is that it was actually a kind of mix of an industrial hands-on education and a more classical education. You did learn those things that are associated with classical education in industrial school. You just also learned other things that were pragmatically useful. Eatonville is a jewel in some of the visual narratives that are presented in Washington's work. His Negro in Business spotlights the success of some of the residents here. These are images that you can find in the archive at the New York Public Library, the Schomburg Center. And of course, Washington is honored and celebrated in the Hungerford grounds with his own school, the Washington Hall. Next. Yeah. So what is the philosophy at the core of Eatonville? Well, the Eatonville speaker makes it pretty clear what their philosophy was. On the front page of this archival image that was actually discovered by my colleague Scott French, it said, hey, solve the race problem of the United States. Come to my home in Eatonville. So at the very core, what African Americans are being offered in their conversations in the context of a place like Eatonville is the opportunity to have a space to imagine a future. And that is quintessentially Afrofuturists. These are people who are looking at the landscape in front of them and imagining a future and they're articulating that future to potential other members of their community. The net result of these, the net result of these efforts was that Eatonville was a destination with Hungerford a major sort of anchor in that destination area. As a boarding school available to African Americans in a landscape of a region where further education on grade school was very limited, Eatonville became part of a kind of narrative of progress that dominated not just Central Florida, but really the Southeast. As we see here, Eatonville was the home of numerous activities, and Hungerford School was a sort of like hub for these activities. Here we have the sort of talk about development. This is being published in a publication called Free Intelligence, where they're talking about the activities happening in Hungerford. Next slide, please. One of the things that I think is important to sort of recognize, and part of the reason I was talking about this in the context of these things is, when people talk about the past, especially African Americans in the context of these black spaces, these historic black spaces in particular, they can tend to seem to be romanticized in this very difficult period of the year, in the period of the Rise of Jim Crow. But one of the sort of benefits that scholars have talked about is that the closed system offered by segregation and the sort of coordination of resources and ideology created in these black spaces did create a system that was self-sustaining, a kind of perpetual motion machine. This is why sometimes when we think about black time, I think about them as inches of imagination. Within the context of the system that's being created, black people are not in a deficit. Within the context of the system that's being implemented, black people are the leaders. Within the context of the system that's being imagined, black people can see a future. These spaces are not spaces of sadness for black people, they are spaces of promise. And they are defined at some very basic level in opposition to the dwindling opportunities in the public sphere that are being offered by white people at the same time. So it's no surprise that when people remember, even going back decades on decades, they remember sort of positive elements of the spaces like the Hungerford and like Eatonville is in part because of that success. Right? That this is a system that's self-sustaining, transformative, and uplifting. In order to make this work, next slide, please. The narratives associated with Eatonville and the narratives associated with the Hungerford School were actually national narratives. It's important to recognize, let's say, they're part of this network associated with Booker T. Washington and his network of supporters, but each individual sort of leader of these schools is actually narrativizing the story to audiences, both locally, nationally, and on some level internationally. They're looking for money. And they're doing things that become the sort of backbone for that visioning for the future. They're serving as a hub for all kinds of activities. And this is noted within the Washingtonian system. Next slide, please. When we think about the question of progress for African Americans, one of the places that's always at the center of that narrative, especially in this period, the early 1900s, is documented and celebrated in publications from Tuskegee, like the Negro Yearbook. And the efforts here are always really important because they situate these black spaces as destinations where there are black people who are economically successful, there are black people who are professionals, there are black people who are offering people opportunity for development and for a future. Next slide. As we see, always, one of the things that becomes really important, this is a question of space as well. There are spaces that were very successful in the past, but did not have the institutional infrastructure to be recognized. One of the things that's really important to sort of recognize from a historical standpoint is that places like Eatonville, places like those that are supported in sort of like Kyle Sullivan Alliance, these are places that are able to survive, but there are countless places that we've lost. There's actually right now a kind of ongoing set of conversations in academia about trying to recover the story of community and practice
that were implemented after the Civil War by Black people across the South. There are countless communities that were erased, not necessarily through violence, although there are many prime examples of that, but through the extension of city boundaries around them, through a kind of economic erasure where their economic activity was sort of co-opted by larger Black institutions. And we only have to sort of search back and see that there actually was, and over a long period of time, very persistent effort on the part of African Americans to actively pursue a kind of future vision, free from the oppression associated with Black people. Next slide, please. I always come back to Eatonville in the context of these questions, in part because Eatonville had that national reputation as the first historic community, in part because of Zora Hurston created that narrative in the public's mind. We get debate about who was first, but the reality is there was a moment where the sort of founding period we have a large number of Black towns. But Eatonville sort of stands apart in part because Hurston wrote about it so eloquently, and then Washington celebrated it through photographs. These spaces and the leadership offered by African Americans, next slide, are always really important to the narratives that are being promoted nationally. As we get and past World War I, there's a tremendous still desire for African Americans to try to transform and interrupt the oppressive system that's been created in the context of Jim Crow segregation. And even in this context, education in the South and education in Eatonville remains very important. These advertisements from The Crisis, which is the magazine of the NAACP, call attention to only two educational institutions in the state of Florida that you can go to, at Wars College and Humphrey. This gets us to a kind of pivotal period in the story of African Americans, both locally but also nationally. In the aftermath of World War I, we did a long period with NAACP's activism around desegregation. This has really tough consequences in the context of Eatonville and other Black spaces. In particular, in this post-war period, especially after World War II, Part 2 of World War I, what is the sort of space being offered for Black people, and how does Eatonville and Humphrey sort of fit into that? Well, this is perhaps the most controversial part of our contemporary story, because obviously in the aftermath of the war and the idea of trying to end segregation, there's tremendous uptick around civil rights activism. We see it in the Blvd campaign, we can see it in the sort of court cases that are making their way around education at different levels. And the idea here is particularly important in terms of like a kind of class dynamic. And I recognize this in particular when we talk about this in the context of Eatonville and Florida in particular, because the NAACP's narrative becomes one of the sort of defining narrative of the period. Orange County has some of the highest sort of participation, and Florida in general has high participation in NAACP. So that legal campaign to overcome segregation is an important part of the rhetoric and ideology of the region. In the post-war period, we see veterans in Central Florida pressing on things like housing. In fact, they're very successful. One of the first housing subdivisions for African Americans in the country is actually in Orlando, and that's Washington Shores. So we see African Americans sort of pursuing the sort of agreed upon narrative associated with liberation and transformation in this post-war period. Next slide. Next slide. But at the same time, Hungerford remains a destination. This is a controversial point because as this successful advocacy for civil rights, successful advocacy for challenging Jim Crow segregation is making its way through the courts, there's a pressure that's being created in the context of Hungerford that's almost unexpected in a way, but it's one of the things that myself and my colleagues, Scott, have been thinking about and writing about in particular because of the current debate about the Hungerford property. So, the current status of the Hungerford property actually stretches back to this political moment. There was a public debate in the 1950s
about what to do with the Hungerford property. As my colleague Scott has talked about and written about, the trustees of the Hungerford property have drastically transformed by the time we get to the mid-century. Many of the black trustees or trustees that were more adherent to the Washingtonian vision for the school have gone. And we have a set of trustees who are thinking about the school in the context of that public debate about desegregation and liberation. And this pressure around equalization, that is the idea that has been championed through the courts that black people have to have access to education, that's being successfully pressed through the courts. This becomes a specter hanging over how the Hungerford School is understood in the context of the trustees' vision. As you can see, the trustees are actually under pressure to come up with some way to equalize the educational opportunities offered to black students in Central Florida. And the Hungerford School is a great option because instead of building a school that is equal to white people, remember, we're not quite to the point where we're going to do desegregation. We can buy a school that will be equal and allow black people to go there. At this time, this sort of narrative is in the record. This is one of the things that's really interesting as we think about the current debates about why the Hungerford School was sold and why everything happened. This equalization question is a pivotal one. Even though Mary McLeod generated a narrative and generated a plan to allow the Hungerford School to be a preparatory school for the women, that plan was rejected in favor of a sort of sale. There is always a clear set of narratives that can be recovered by what black people did. And in this case, it's no different. We're able to find the sort of points of the plan that Bethune put out, you can see them here. But ultimately, the decision here isn't about sort of equity. It's not about the sort of vision of freedom articulated by African Americans who founded the town of Hungerford. It's really about trying to solve the problem of equalization. So ultimately, this plan is rejected, and the Hungerford School is sold. The financial truth, though, is that while people talked about at the time the Hungerford School not being economically viable, it was by most estimates. It still had a number of boarding students from around the state. Yes, it has students coming from Eatonville, which had always have been the case. But ultimately, that decision to sell really stands as a part of that broader sort of pressure being articulated by African Americans about equalization and the challenges represented by that. As we think about the sort of consequences of that in the contemporary period, it's important to recognize the Hungerford challenge today is a direct result of this sort of misinterpretation of the landscape of the past, or at least from my perspective, an overlooking of the nuances around the sort of external pressures associated with the landscape of the past. Our current debates about the Hungerford property and our current debates about Eatonville proper, and really all the historical black spaces, have to take into account sort of cascading consequences of the past. Next one. Next one. What the Georgia Hurston Festival of Arts and Humanities often does is that it brings to the fore a legacy of black thought, black practice, black creativity, and makes that a sort of central part and central to people's minds, and places, I think, that legacy in conversation with the contemporary moment. This is something that was really key to Georgia Hurston's philosophy. Ultimately, I always tell my students what Georgia Hurston real revelation is there's nothing wrong with blackness. And that is fundamentally something that sort of Western colonial slave society cannot abide. So every time a person does something, she always does it from that perspective. And that really gets you at the center of why she faces the challenges she faces. But ultimately, when we think about the story of Hungerford, the story of Eatonville, the story of the sort of post-Civil War experience, what we're really talking about is the power of Black people imagining space. We're talking about the power of Black people pushing forward and imagining tools that are necessary to have a future that is transformative, uplifting, and liberatory. And I think that is the thing that I will always appreciate about the Blvd Festival and its efforts every year. Thank you. And I did it in your time.
Pastor Smith, is it possible for you to run the French translation that was provided so that the persons who are privy to that, is that possible for us to do that before we go into Q&A? We'll just go through so that you have at least the essence of what he was saying for those who aren't French is the first time.
I want to apologize because my French translation is mechanical, not human. Because the translator did not get to me in time. So don't read that translation. Just ask me a question. It'll be easier on everybody. I promised my colleague Scott that I would be 40 minutes, and I'm very proud of myself. Academics have to talk too much, so I don't have to be the person who rules the schedule. Yes, sir.
Related to Blvd Washington's ideology of marrying the needs of the Black community to the understanding of life over community, and when harmony to the community. How do you see that going on today with the politics of the day and the circumstances of the day, or historic Black families with lawsuits? How do you see getting that today?
The question was in terms of Blvd Washington's philosophy related to cultivating benefactors and giving resources to Black spaces and Black communities. How do you do that today while those structures are sort of decayed or atrophied and so on and so forth? I think that's a great question, and my answer is twofold. One, I think one of the things that for organizations like the Historic Black Housing Settlement Alliance and historic places, they always have an opportunity, rightly or wrongly, to engage with institutional bodies to get funds for very particular things, right? So if you think, like I'm in academia, you think about organizations like the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who's very sort of like committed, especially right now, to supporting sort of culture and race questions. So, you know, can those communities and organizations like HBTSA get together and imagine projects that can tap into those funds, right? The other thing is we live in an asymmetrical media landscape. And what I mean by that is when I was really little, because I'm an older man now, there were only 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. That is no longer the case. And therefore, we live in a kind of a media landscape where crafting messages and creating communities online can be matched with small donor projects. And the challenge there, I think, for the contemporary community is articulating a message about what you're trying to do, creating infrastructure, and being clear. And this is a kind of classic, I would say a classic philanthropic challenge. Even those people back then had a challenge. What both the benefit and the curse of someone like Blvd Washington is, he got the ear of particular wealthy people, and they bought into the narrative that he was saying. But I would stress, and I think the record supports this. He's saying one thing to those white people, and he's saying a different thing to these white people. It's painfully obvious that that is the case. And that remains, I think, something that sort of like works in the background, but we don't necessarily have to do that now because we have a global conversation about Black spaces and Black efforts. And so is it possible for us to take advantage of that global landscape and ask small amounts of money from a lot of people to do very specific things? And I think that's one of the things that you see happening online around very particular things. And the question becomes, can you develop a skill set to do that more consistently? Right, so those two things, and my colleague Walter does a lot of this kind of work and talks about it a lot, and he'll be talking later on. Those two things are the ways that you sort of leverage institutional pathways. And this, there's always a difference between a city doing something versus a neighborhood, right? Like I work with neighborhoods that are struggling with gentrification. They can't do things because they're just a neighborhood. But if you're a city, you can do things that individuals can't do. And that's fundamentally true. I can, work with a historic Black neighborhood and be like, hey, let's try to get the streets named after the Black founding members. But there are a lot of white people who own property who I don't care about the former Black founding member, right? Like, you just can't do it. You don't have that problem if you're a municipality, but the municipality has a problem of articulating a vision and establishing goals and finding the grantor or the institutional body that's going to, do that with them and marshal their own point. So it is complicated, and I'm not going to suggest that it's not, but that is a legitimate pathway, one that individuals don't have. And then if you're looking at the individual, can you create a narrative that those individuals can participate in? Because one of the things very consistent about Eatonville is that everyone who doesn't live in Eatonville knows about Eatonville. Even in the even the early 20th century. Like they can read stories about Eatonville in Illinois, they can read stories about Eatonville in Iowa. There are a lot more Black people in Iowa than in my past in the early 20th century. But why? It's because they wanted to tell that story from the very beginning. Hey, this is where you come to solve the problem of racism. Leave those white people behind. Come to paradise. I sometimes joke that Eatonville is like greater than and NY, Gary, who's the head of PC, always makes fun of me for that. But in some ways, it is a mystical place in the minds of many people. It is a place that exists in literature, and it exists as a affirming place. And that is very compelling to people. I would argue that there are similar narratives about many Black towns. I was born in Alabama. I know Tuskegee. Right? I wasn't born in Tuskegee, but every Black person in Alabama knows Tuskegee. There are ways that all these narratives can be articulated, right? And can you tap that into small government things? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I really enjoyed your presentation about very, very informative. You talked a lot about Blvd Washington dividing his audience with white and Black. I just would like to know your opinion in the 21st century. Do you think that divide is always based on white and Black, or do you think now we should be divided in four sections between white women, Black women, white women, white women? Do you think now this is the time to talk about that? I just want to know.
Right, so the question is, first, they go to Tom. And second was, Blvd Washington so had a divided audience, and should we divide the divided audience down between Black women, Black men, white women, Black men? Is that right? Yeah. Two things I would say to that. First, I think it's important to recognize that class is actually a very important idea here. And so I would look at what someone like T. Thomas Fortune was pretty clear about. Like, if you think about what is driving the sort of ailments facing people of color, those are the same ailments that are facing poor white people, right? And so the divide, race is a tool in that divide, gender is a tool in that divide. And one of the things about Afrofuturism that I think is always very, very core is that it is a black feminist ideology. Like, part of the way that Afrofuturism philosophies will operate is that it recognizes intersectionality, it recognizes the ways that oppressing women and oppressing black people are really, the root cause of the same sort of like desire for control, right? Why is it that people care about only one part of the real estate of black women's bodies? Like, one part, arm, leg, who cares? But the womb, I really care about the womb. It's about control. That control stretches back to slavery, right? The path of the status of the child, the status of the mom, right? Like, it's this exact same set of ideas. So there's a way where we have to sort of recognize that a philosophy that interrupts that colonial narrative, when it demonizes, uses race to demonize and then uses race to dehumanize, is connected to these same set of ideas. And that's a rethinking for the people of color, and it's a rethinking for white people, right? So division isn't the way, you're like, hey, we have to have a narrative. To me, it's not the way. You have to have a narrative for black men, a different narrative for black women, a narrative for white men, a narrative for white women, then a narrative for trans, and then a narrative for like bi, and then a narrative, right? Like, it won't work. By the time you get, it's a game of telephone about liberation. That's not the idea. So instead, I would say, hey, what is the root cause? The root cause is about oppressing people and extraction and power. What disrupts that? What set of policies and practices disrupt that? You don't have to like transform the entire system. You can just build a set of policies and practices that lessens the impact of that idea in whatever you do. And I would argue that you're being more towards the Afrofuturist idea of liberation. And I think my time is up.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Albert. If you could, if you have any kind of questions, please try to step forward to mics. There's 30 different questions. That way, people that's tuning in can actually hear the questions. So we want everyone that's online to be able to hear what your important questions are. So please take a moment and move to one of these aisles where the microphone is located. Okay?
Yes, sir. Just in apologies. I'm an educator myself. I've actually gone to Islam of the world. I've lived in Islam for a year and a half. Focused on creating education for children. It's about education for adults. It's not the top boarding schools of the world. Right? In my perception, I think you're very correct in this class distinction, right? Because I've never seen a difference in intelligence, whether I'm dealing with children in Islam from South Africa, children in Islam Albania, inner city in England, Ireland, and the form of colonialism. Colonialism has always managed to establish itself as a power base by destroying the education systems of the countries that they've taken over. What do you feel would need to be done to change or provide opportunity in inner cities and
Obviously, we're in Florida. I grew up in Florida. There's a war on education in Florida, especially around the question of race. Ultimately, if we look to the past, what is it that black communities and marginalized communities did? The fact that they educated their own.
they had community schools. We do have a benefit, I think, at some level of the digital age, so there's more information available, but that's not necessarily knowledge. I always caution my students, you might have read that, but did you understand it? Like, you need some context by which to understand these things. And we need to sort of recognize that there are open models for liberatory education that have been championed for many decades across the United States and around the world. And we want to make those things accessible to people through digital tools. I'm very proud of the fact that all the work in our cycle, we strive very hard to make that open educational work, that we go back and read, and see, and participate, and see the things that people are talking about, and say, hey, this book, that book. As much as humanly possible, we can do on and things like that. And those are really important pathways for everyone to recognize. Those pathways have to be multi-pronged. So when we think about this in terms of children, it's easier, but when we think about it in terms of adults, it's more complicated. And adults need education too. That's why in the labor movements of the world, there's always conversations and talking amongst the workers about what it is that we think we're trying to do. Like, people get in the room and go like, hey, this, they not necessarily know Marx, but they know the laws, they treat them right. So like, what we gonna do, right? They don't necessarily have to have every theoretical thing laid out. They can figure it out. They know. They actually were there. So you can overlay always more sophisticated set of arguments to technology. That's why I think we always celebrate understanding that the lived experience of people is an important sort of pathway to knowledge. But ultimately, yeah, we still have to work together. And now, I'm usually the last question, because I'm not going to be the person that makes the schedule go wrong.
My question to you is, do you think there is now a divide within the community along class line? Those that are being successful and those that aren't? Do you see that there is a divide?
So your question is, do I see a divide in the community between class? You talking about the Black community?
Correct. In the Black community. And in reference to education also.
No, that one's a toughie. I think that there
is one.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely a question about the quality of education that Black people are able to get because of life. And this goes back to with education system structure, right? I grew up in a relatively poor neighborhood, so I went to a school that was not that great. Not that great in the sense, like, it didn't get the same resources. Not that the teachers weren't great, like, they were really great. But teachers only do so much if the classroom is overcrowded and they don't have all the right books, right? And so it's not a lack of will on the part of the educator to try to deliver education. It's sometimes a lack of resources. And that is often based on property taxes. Property taxes are about class, right there. You only live where you can afford to live, and property taxes generate the income that goes to education. So in that way, they are always connected. But again, that too is complicated because there is, when we're talking about that, we're talking about that K through 12, we're talking about that at college, right? So in K through 12, that is a clear problem, like this allocation of resources and property taxes. At college, we are in the midst of a bit of a conversation about the role of historic Black institutions in a historic moment, I would say. I think it's sort of simmering under the radar. Like, what is it that Black institutions, Black educational institutions, HBCUs could be doing, should be doing, are doing, blah, 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 blah. I think that conversation is a little simplistic, right? Because it doesn't recognize the sort of like systemic challenges, right?
I just think that the color issues seem to fade away once there's a reasonable income coming in, and you get that we still have certain aspects that have not been cleared up.
You mean the color issue basically between Black and white people, or color?
No, within our own community. I just think that once the graduate in their sororities and fraternities, they no longer realize that there is still an issue with the color. There's still an issue separating us. Well, in terms of economics, I'm saying, they don't look back, they go back to the community.
They don't give back, okay. Well, you know, I think, I'll look in on this point. I think this goes back to the gentleman's point. Is there infrastructure for them to sort of give back in a way that's understandable? Because, you know, it's always important to recognize, I always tell my students, like, we live in a world that my great-great-grandmother would, like, not believe. And so we are living the Afrofuturist vision that other people imagine. Right? So there's a way where, like, we have to continue to modify what that liberatory benchmark is. Like, we have to, like, understand what that looks like. And again, that becomes a question like, are we having these conversations about overcoming oppression? Like, are we having a conversation about the outcomes? And in some very basic way, we're having those conversations, but we're having them perhaps too small. Like, if all of my friends get around the table and we can solve all the problems of the world, and all your friends get around the table and they can solve all the problems of the world, maybe we should all be around the same table solving all the problems of the world, right? And like, I think that is a real sort of like structural question, and that's why meetings like this perhaps become very, very important. So I'll say thank you.
No more question? I had a question. Yes, that's one last one. Oh, no more question. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Chambliss. Can you hear me? Okay. I mentioned one of the pillars of support for this conference is the College of Arts and Humanities and the Dean's Office. Another pillar of support is the Center for Humanities and Digital Research at UCF. They have been supporting this conference for 5 years, and we have the great pleasure of welcoming one of the co-directors of the center as our second keynote speaker this morning. Dr. Bruce Jans is professor in the Department of Philosophy, co-director of the Center for Humanities and Digital Research, and core faculty in the Text and Technology PhD program, all at the University of Central Florida. He works in African philosophy and humanities, contemporary European philosophy, digital humanities, and on concepts of place and space across many disciplines. He has taught in Canada, the US, Kenya, and South Africa. His latest book is African Philosophy and an Activist Cognition, The Space of Thought, published by Bloomsbury in 2023. Welcome, Bruce Jans.
Great, thank you so much. It's been a while since I've stood in front of one of these. I always said to myself, when I have to stand in front of one of these, I'm going to tell the truth. And you might think, should you always tell the truth? But of course, I'm a teacher, and so I have a long history of standing in front of students and taking on positions, taking on people's beliefs about things and trying to represent them as carefully and as sympathetically as possible, whether or not I personally believe them. Right? And so the students might see me as believing this thing this day and this thing that day. When I stand in front of one of these, I tell the truth. So, welcome. Glad to see all of you here. I want to talk a little bit about Afrofuturism, which is, after all, the theme of this conference. And in particular, I want to think about both parts of that term, Afro and future. I want to spend as much time on thinking about future as I do about Afro. And I want to spend as much time also thinking about Africa as a continent, and not simply Afrofuturism as it's represented within the popular media. There was a time when, shortly after independence, that the future looked extremely rosy on the continent of Africa. There were many great dreams, and then for a number of reasons, that in a lot of different places, that hope started dissipating. There was disappointment. In South Africa, you can have a phenomenon of the born frees, the young people who were born after the fall of apartheid. And they had come often with a great sense of disappointment because some of the issues that have, there was hope that there would be progress on, there was not as much as they hoped. So colonizers were quick to say, well, see, Africa is incapable of governing itself. The old familiar racial stories, comfortable to Westerners, and deeply insulting to Africans, found their place in news media, in popular fiction, in television. It didn't take much to keep Rudyard Kipling's depiction of Africans alive as half devil and half child. So some of the powers of these stories are connected to the ideas that African languages and cultures had no concept of time or the future, of the distant future. Next slide, please. We can see this in the writings of John M.B, who's a very famous African philosopher. This book came out in 1969, and in it he had his theory of time, which he derived from African languages. And so as you can see here, he's got two central terms. One of them is sasa, and one of them is zamani. Okay? And so zamani looks into the past. You can see that on the left side here. And he looked at various African languages, and what he thought he saw was that sasa, which was a term that he regarded as looking at the present and into the future, but not very far into the future. So you can see on the right side there, the far future amounts to about 2 to 6 months. And so people have looked at this and they've said, well, look, Africans don't have a concept of the future, right? Look, Africa himself is saying this. And so it's fed into those kind of racialized myths about Africa that the sense of time is not the same as it is elsewhere, that we don't have civilizations building for a very long time in the future and all of those sorts of things. Now, if you know any history at all about Africa, you know that's just not true. I mean, there are many great civilizations in Africa that have existed for hundreds of years. There is plenty of evidence of long-term thinking of all sorts, projects, architecture, kingdoms, ideas. And so this has been true for a long time. And so there's a strange contradiction between, how one imagines the future and the actual facts on the ground as you see them in Africa. So to begin, let's take, next slide please, let's take the words of Ashil Mbembe. Ashil Mbembe is a historian, and I would say he's also a philosopher. He's from the Cameroon originally. He works in South Africa now. And he said at the beginning of a conference a few years ago, the future is anything but determined. The future is open. There was a moment when nobody was talking about the future in relation to Africa. Everyone assumed that we were a hopeless continent destined for chaos and disorder. That is no longer the case. So Ashil Mbembe announces and states what I think is absolutely true and what's obvious, that we can talk about the future, but the question is how? How might we talk about the future in the context of Africa? We could point to, more facts on the ground. The youngest continent in terms of demographics. A great many young people. We could look at a wealth of resources. We could look at digital creations, media, technology, film, music, architecture. Much of this, I teach a course in African humanities, and I love blowing my students away every single week with something absolutely amazing that comes from the continent of Africa. Right? They have no idea, right? You want to see something great that's digital? Let me show you. Right? You want to see some great music? There are people that you didn't even know were African that you love already. And so over and over and over, we can just show them how much great stuff is coming out of Africa. But along with this Afro-optimism, we might also have Afro-pessimism. For every opportunity, there's a challenge. Those challenges come in many different ways and from many different directions. Some of them are because of the heritage of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. Some are produced by problems in governance, including corruption and cronyism. Some are due to the challenges of rapidly increasing population and urbanization. And some of them are simply due to the fact that Africa is part of the world, and so therefore has a part in the problems of the world, like climate change, and like species degradation and things of that nature. So here's the thing about the future. We don't know it yet. That might seem obvious, but we don't know it because it cannot be known. Not because we're too ignorant or simply lack information. We might be optimistic or pessimistic or even blasé, but we continue to be faced with the issue that Africa has been told by most of the world that it has no future. It has no future not because it will disappear or something like that, but because in its very constitution it's not capable of having a future. That's the story that's been told by especially Western media. So I'm here to tell you something that will probably not surprise you. That view that Africa has no future is rooted in racism. It does not deserve to be taken seriously. But then given that, how could we think about the future? So, we have a candidate in Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is not primarily a philosophical movement, but an artistic and aesthetic one. It's literary, it's musical, it's cinematic. So surely Afrofuturism must give us some direction. And yet, the South African writer Moholi Mashigo says, Afrofuturism is not for Africans living in Africa. Next slide, please. We have Nedia Okorafor. Actually, that's the beginning. If you go to the slide after that one, there we go. Nedia Okorafor, who's a very honored science fiction writer. She's won Hugo's and Nebulas. If you know science fiction world, she's kind of won it all. She says, I am an African futurist and an African Jujuist. African futurism is a subcategory of science fiction. African Jujuism is a subcategory of fantasy that respectfully acknowledges the seamless blend of true existing African spiritualities and cosmologies within the imaginative. Next slide, please. She says, African futurism is similar to Afrofuturism in the way that blacks on the continent and the black diaspora are all connected by blood, spirit, history, and future. The difference is that African futurism is specifically and more directly rooted in African culture, history, mythology, and point of view, as it then branches into the black diaspora and does not privilege or center the West. African futurism is concerned with visions of the future. Is interested in technology, leaves the earth, skews optimistic, is centered on and predominantly written by people of African descent, black people, and is rooted first and foremost in Africa. It's less concerned with what could have been, and more concerned with what is and can be or will be. It acknowledges, grapples with, and carries what has been. Next slide, please. This is the last bit of what she says, and this was a blog post actually a number of years ago. African futurism does not have to extend beyond the continent of Africa, though often it does. Its default is not Western. Its default or center is African. This is distinctly different from Afrofuturism, a word coined by Mark Derry. So her example is Afrofuturism, and she's referring now to the movie of Black Panther. Afrofuturism, Wakanda builds its first outposts in Oakland, California. And in African futurism, Wakanda builds its first outpost in a neighboring African country instead. So she tells us that she wants to reimagine this notion Afrofuturism by recentering Africa itself, Africa the continent itself, because what she sees as a writer, and she's a very prolific and experienced writer, is that when we often talk about Afrofuturism, it often leaves out Africa. Right? It often sees Africa as the place where everything came from, but all of the energy is somewhere else. So, next slide, please. So we return to Ashio Mbembe. We've met him already. He wrote a paper called African Modes of Self-Writing. And in it, this is about 2001, I think he wrote it, and in it he talks about facing the kind of fundamental challenges of the African continent, which he regarded as three fundamental challenges: slavery, colonialism, and apartheid. These are the things that cannot be avoided, cannot be ignored within the history of Africa. And what he was interested in was what he thought of as inadequate responses to those three things. Inadequate but attractive responses. One of them he called nativism, and the other one he called Afro-radicalism. So I think we have a good illustration of what that looks like if we actually look at the aforementioned Black Panther movie. So next slide, please. So I don't know how many of you have seen Black Panther. This is an image of Wakanda. It was a very powerful movie. It did very well for Marvel. And I know I was in Harlem when it first came out, and boy, the lines were insane. I mean, it was just like, and people were just like, it was like they went out, saw the movie and just kind of went back and lined up again, and just kept going, And so, if you think about the narrative of that movie, next slide, please, you have a great example of some of what Sheila Mbembe is talking about in these kinds of responses to these challenges. You have them represented with King T'Challa and Eric Killmonger, the two of the main figures in the movie. On the one hand, you have T'Challa, who I'm going to characterize as had a kind of what I'm going to call an original nativism. If you know about Wakanda, it's a place where that was very insular, right? I mean, nativists are people who want a space to be their own people, and usually what that means today is getting rid of others, getting rid of immigrants, getting rid of these people, those people. Well, this is what I'm calling original nativism. You didn't have to do that because it never started out like that. So you've got this kind of already established kingdom, which is a very well-defined sort of place. It's a technological utopia, and it maintains its restrictions for the good of the world, as well as for the good of Wakanda. So that's the one side. That's the nativism side of Sheila Mbembe's two answers that he finds problematic. The other side is Eric Killmonger's side. That's the Afro-radical side, right? What he wants is to use the tools of Wakanda to overturn the world order, to enable those who have been marginalized by racism, by slavery, by apartheid, by all of those evils, to be able to finally speak back, to finally set the world right. Okay? Next slide, please. So what happens at the end of the movie? Well, it's a kind of compromise, but it's an interesting kind of compromise. As I mentioned already, we have the first center, Wakanda Center, opening in Oakland. And it is a center that's meant to share Wakanda's wealth and knowledge with the diaspora. So is this really a third way between those two things? Is this a better way than nativism or Afro-radicalism, or does it just follow the pattern of billionaires helping to solve the world's problems by helping the less fortunate? And I mean, it sounds a little bit like what Bill Gates would do to solve a problem. Throw a bunch of money at it, establish an infrastructure. So is this what Afrofuturism really has in store? Billionaire philanthropic capitalism just directed at a different group of people. Well, see, there's what Sheila Mbembe's problem is with all of this. We can compound that by looking at Derek Bell. Derek Bell, if you recognize that name, if you recognize the idea of critical race theory, it has, of course, been kind of dragged through the mud in recent years, and it's almost unrecognizable. But if you want to go back to what critical race theory really is and really was, you look at someone like Derek Bell, along with a number of other figures. What Derek Bell was interested in was what he thought of as a real race theory that was not simply symbolic. It was not simply a set of symbolic victories. Having the right person in the right place, that's a good thing. Yes, having the first black person in this, that's a good thing. But at the end, he thinks it's essentially a symbolic victory. What he wants really is what he called racial realism. He wanted real material advancement. His argument is that the fact of racism, we look back at the trajectory of racism through history, and what we see is not a move towards its eradication, but one step forward and then it reconfigures itself in other forms and takes on different kinds of faces and masks, and here you are again fighting similar battles. And I feel that in Florida all the time. I feel like I haven't been here before, right? I mean, I feel like, weren't my parents' generation fighting some of these battles, and now here we are again. It just changes those implications and all of that, but it just comes back. And so what Derek Bell was interested in was not just a symbolic victory. We beat this version of it. Tomorrow will take care of itself. But he wanted real material change. He wanted something that was much deeper than that. So what I think we need is a different kind of frame for how we think about the future. If we simply think about it as something that can be controlled, if only we were smart enough, if only we had enough money, if only we could then have some sort of guarantee about the future. I'm here to tell you that nobody has a guarantee about the future, and those that tell you that they do are fooling themselves. Right? When we see a lot of contemporary Western society that, in its hubris, thinks that it can control the future. We can engineer nature. Nature comes back to bite you. Right? Nature comes back and says, you don't understand anywhere near well enough. We're in an ecological mess. We're in a resource mess. We're in all sorts of kinds of messes, in part because of our hubris when thinking that we can control the future. Here is what I have learned. I've learned many things, but here's one thing I've learned from reading in African philosophy. As I look more at concepts like Ubuntu, right, which is common in South Africa, Ubuntu is this notion of togetherness. We together precede any of us as individuals. And so we together are the important thing to understand first. Okay? What I see in those things is not an idea of not understanding the future. What I see is a humble recognition of how we face an uncertain future that we all face, and not think that our attitude should be, we got to control it, we got to master it, we got to dominate it, right? It's a different path. So how do we get there? Next slide, please. What I want to talk about are three figures who I think really give us a picture of how to get there. Next slide, please. That's just summarized what I just said. Next slide. There we go. So the first of these figures is Suzanne Césaire. So you may be familiar with Aimé Césaire. He's famous as one of the central figures in the negritude movement, along with Léon Demas and Leopold Sédar Senghor. Very important figures in Black intellectual life throughout the 20th century. Suzanne Césaire was married to Aimé Césaire for a while. They split up. She was a figure in her own right. She was a very, very significant thinker, I think. She was an editor for a journal called Tropique. Next slide, please. In Martinique. That was during the war years. That was 1941 to 45. And so her approach to negritude was different than sometimes what you see in some of the other figures' approach of negritude. She was not particularly interested in excavating some sort of metaphysical black essence of some sort that was somehow different from any other essence. Next slide, please. She was much more interested in looking forward rather than looking back. So this was the journal that she edited. I know it's far too small for anyone to read anything there. Next slide. So she talked about things like this. She said about poetry, for example, that Martinican poetry will be cannibal or it will not be cannibal. That's what she said. What she mean by that? What she meant was that poetry must draw on itself. It must draw on its own life. It does not draw on the colonial structures around it, nor does it take the easy way out. She had no use for sappy sentimental literature meant to just make people feel good, to keep them in their place. Even if that placekeeping was done by the Martinicans themselves, she would rail against her own people. Why don't you look to the future more and not simply settle for life as it is? She's no romantic. Even more pointedly, next slide, oh yeah, they're on, great. Even more pointedly, she said that it cannot be a backward return, a resurrection of the past. She said that every living strength must be brought together to become conscious of the incredible store of varied energies until now locked up within us. Right? So she is really interested in figuring out what it means to take a step forward by not being kind of locked into the view that you've always had, but able to think something new. So next slide, please. One tool that she used quite a lot for this was surrealism. So the surrealist movement was very prominent in France during this time, and she was friends with many of the major figures in that movement. And here's what she says about that. Our surrealism will then supply them the leaven from their very depths. It will be time finally to transcend the sordid contemporary antinomies, whites, blacks, Europeans, Africans, civilized savages. The powerful magic of the Bahulis will be recovered, drawn from the very well springs of life. Colonial idiocies will be purified by the welding art's blue flame. The metal of our metal, our cutting edge of steel, our unique commissions, all will be recovered. And then she ends that off with surrealism, tightrope of our hope. So what she's looking at, I mean, if you know anything about surrealism, we often think of it as kind of a dream world, an imaginary world that's turned into art. You know, there are many surrealist artists that have strange visions. Well, what she's using it is as a way of breaking out from our normal way of thinking about the world. It doesn't have to be this way. We can think differently. So, Suzanne says there, I think it's brilliant. Tendai Sehoy. He's a young scholar. I had the privilege of being in conversation with him in Bayreuth, Germany last October at a conference. He gave the keynote lecture, and then what they asked me to do was to have a conversation with him in front of the crowd for about half an hour, and then we went to questions. And it was great. I mean, I knew his work before, but I'd never actually met him. But I knew in 5 minutes of meeting, we were going to have a great time. You know, we talked about, the ways in which pain becomes lodged in the body, and not just in the individual body, but the collective body. He's really interested in figuring out how we can kind of shed the heritage of oppression, shed the heritage of racism. We talked about John Amory, the Holocaust survivor, who John Amory talked about his body no longer being able to dwell in the world, not just dwell in a particular place, but the result of the Holocaust for him was that he could not dwell in any place. There was no place that was home for him anymore. His body was just not at home in the world. So for Sehoy, Black thought is about looking forward. It's not about restoring order. It's about, finding freedom. And so we talked about what that looked like. What does freedom look like? And you know where he went? He went to jazz. And I was so happy he did. What he said was, look at the jazz, especially during bebop. Right? You have the Miles Davis Quintet, for example. Right? You have this play off of each other of these people who are not executing a written score, but they're working off of charts. They are, everyone has their moment. Everyone is doing more than they even thought that they would be able to do. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. We talked about it when we talked about science, about expertise. Have you ever had the experience of being so in the moment, so into something that you don't even know what you're going to say next, or what you're going to do next? Maybe you're in sports, or maybe you're in music, and all of a sudden something comes out of you, and you're like, damn, where'd that come from? Wow, I didn't know I could do that. Have you ever had that? I mean, there's that moment where you actually just create something. And what Sehoy was arguing was that is jazz. That is the moment of jazz where people make that moment possible together for each other. Right? There is freedom there. here's why this is important. When you think about the notion of freedom, when you're facing all of these, the history of slavery, apartheid, colonialism, all of this, it might be tempting to think that there is no freedom until you solve those issues, until you solve those problems. Once we get that right, then freedom is possible. And in talking about jazz, what Sitole was trying to say was, there is freedom possible right now. Yeah, we got to get that stuff right, but there's freedom possible right now. Miles Davis knew very well the world that he lived in. Right? He was under no illusions of the world that he lived in, and yet he could create freedom right there, on the stage. Right? Freedom is possible now. And so what does that look like? What does it look like to imagine that? What does it look like to not have to just wait until all the problems are fixed in order to be free? Right? Doesn't mean you're not going to do that stuff. Of course you will. But that's what jazz is. Number 3 person. Next slide, please. The third person is Sylvia Winter. She is one of the grand old theorists. She's respected in post-colonial theory and Caribbean literature. And my gosh, if I had to make a list of all the things all the areas she draws in, we'd be here all day. She is just an absolute, incredible person. Still alive, and I think she's 97 now or something like that. But she talks about something even more ambitious. What she wants to do is reboot humanism. Right? Now, what's that mean? Right? Well, it's tempting to think about humanism as something which has had the imprint of frankly, people that look like me. White, male. That's what humanism looks like in the European setting, right? The of the human is a person that looks like me, right? Owns property, white, male, straight, all of that stuff, right? And what Sylvia Winter wants to do is she wants to reboot that whole conversation about humanism. Because she thinks that once you do that, once you have that image in place, you'll stop the creative energy. There is no creation possible. And all you're trying to do is live up to a specific model. Right? So A does the wrong model, but B, we should have a different kind of logic for humanism. So what she's interested in is figuring out how is it possible to think the future in a manner that does not simply fall into the patterns of the past. And it is so tempting to do so. Now I want to give you an example here. I promise I'm almost done. Next slide, please. So in 1964, there was, I don't know how many of you know this, a Zambian space program. And this was during the space race between USSR and the US, the race to the moon. And so in Zambia, next slide please, in Zambia there was this person named Edward Makuka Colosso, and he was a science teacher. He became the self-appointed director of Zambia's unofficial National Academy of Science, Space Research, and Philosophy, which he formed in 1960. And so what he did was he claimed that Zambia was going to beat both the US and the USSR to the moon. So he recruited what he called astronauts. And he was planning to send one person and 2 cats to the moon. Trainees would roll down hills in barrels and swim on tire swings to simulate weightlessness. Colosso wore a combat helmet, a military uniform, a flowing cape, and the astronauts sometimes wore green-satin jackets and yellow trousers, although they explained that these were not uniforms, but they were part of the dynamic rock music group, but they were not being astronauts. They were going to travel also with a missionary to convert the Martians to Christianity. So look, it's easy to make fun of this, and boy, if you read the news reports at the time, do they ever make fun of it? Right? The Western news reports, right? Who are these crazy people thinking they're going to go to the moon in this wacky way? When we all know it takes so much science, and so much, money, and so much this and so much that, right? And indeed, it might have been a joke, but not the one that the magazines thought that it was. I mean, here's the thing, the Zambian sense of humor. Zambians here today? Zambian sense of humor is clever, it's subtle, it's knowing, it's sharp, it's really something And so there's a certain kind of African futurism going on, I think, in his vision. Not that he seriously thinks they're going to the moon, he's poking fun at the seriousness of everyone else, thinking that that's the more important thing that we should be doing in this world. Right? He's doing this massive, what we would now call performance art sort of thing. He gets all of these people involved with it in order to kind of help us to rethink, why are these exactly the priorities that we should be having? Right? I mean, that probably sounds like a good idea if you're the US and the USSR and it's all of a national pride, but in Zambia, is that really what we should be thinking about? Maybe we should be thinking about, feeding our people and, getting industry that can, participate in the world economy and, all of this other stuff, right? Maybe we should be thinking about that stuff. And yet, the way it was read, it's really fascinating if you look at the magazine and news reports. It's just these stories of, look at these, crazy Zambians, they just didn't get the joke. They didn't get the joke. And so for me, that's a great example of African futurism. And so, what we have here is a kind of answer to the challenge presented to us by Blvd. Blvd, remember, is the one who's saying, to answer back to apartheid, slavery, and colonialism, the strategies of nativism and Afro-radicalism are not going to be adequate. Right? They're not going to get you where you want to go. What should we have instead? Well, we have three answers here. We have Suzanne Césaire, who's telling us we need to find ways to rethink, and we need a tool to do that. She uses surrealism to do it. Right? We need a way to rethink what the future could look like on our terms, right? On African terms, not simply on the terms of someone else that thinks we should be doing something different. We have secondly, Tendai Setole, who says, we all got to become jazz musicians, folks. Right? We all got to figure out what it means to actually work in a community, to not think of ourselves as first and foremost individuals, but first and foremost part of the group. Right? And that can take different forms in different occasions, different times, but it's more than just kind of adding up the expertises, as it were, of individuals and saying, okay, there's our group. Right? If you are not finding a way to create, if you are not, if there's not what we call affordances, if you do not have the affordances, that is the ability to see something new, something possible within the group that you are part of, it might be worth reflecting on what it would take to get there. I mean, groups can bury you up and make you fly. Groups can shut you down and turn you into a role, and nothing more than that. Well, what does it look like to fly? And then thirdly, we have Sylvia Winter, the grand old theorist herself, who says we have to do a much deeper project. It's rethinking how do we think of humanism that's not just in the back of our minds, that image that the Enlightenment had given us, that pinnacle of humans is whatever white people, like male people, people that look like me, whatever that means. What does it look like to rethink that? She goes into great detail on that. If anyone wants to read it, I'm sure I can point you to some things. But she is, she made a career of trying to figure out what that looked like. So, I think these three are the way to think an African future, and that would include in how we normally think about Afrofuturism, which is literarily, science fiction, all of those sorts of things. You can see in Laura Forrest's writing, her science fiction, she's trying to do that. She's a child of Nigerian parents living in Arizona. You can see that in a number of other figures who are now trying to think, how do we not just replicate a storyline that is going to end us up at, like I said, billionaire capitalism as the solution to problems, but ends us up with something much richer than that. Next slide. And that is what I've got. So thank you all. Oh, sorry, no. I promise announced I was going to go back to John B. And I just about forgot to tell you about John B. again. So B is the guy that you remember who talked about Sasa and Zamani, and it looks like he's talking about a version of time which does not look very far into the future. I think we should be looking at B as somebody who's saying we only face an uncertain future, and now we have to figure out what are our resources in order to deal with that. The resources within African tradition may well be ancestors, they may well be elders, they may well be history, they may well be theory, they may well be art, they may well be music, they may well be proverbs. You know, you could look at any culture as a storehouse of what it has to draw on to deal with an uncertain future. But for me, I think he's giving a very positive message and not a limiting message. He's not saying, well, Africans have no sense of the future. No, he's saying Africans have a respect for the future. And they don't have the hubris to think that they can control it. Now, not all Africans everywhere, obviously, but this is an African approach, you would argue, to looking at the future in a manner that can actually be constructive and not simply live. All right, now I'm done. Last slide, please.
I have a question. What is it that gives you hope with Wright and Cesare and shit?
Cesare, yeah.
What is it that gives you hope when you put those three together, their thoughts about the future in terms of Afro-futurism?
Right. Well, in a certain sense, they each have a component of what I find very hopeful. Okay, so I think with Suzanne Césaire, she is writing at a time when you know, Africa, when narrative, the concept of narrative was getting a lot of pushback from people. It was being seen as something which, you know, like even Wally Shaw-Inca, the great Wally Shaw-Inca later on says, a tiger does not proclaim its tigerhood, it just pauses, right? And so narrative was being seen as something which was trying to give a kind of essence to blackness, as over against whiteness. And what I find so interesting about Suzanne Césaire is that she got no time for that stuff. That's not what she's interested in at all. What she's interested in is drawing on the richness of the past, of the people who have gone through stuff, and not being bound by it, not being limited by it, but being able to think something new. You know, the hardest thing to do is ask a new question, because we are so reliant on our past questions. So that's Suzanne Césaire. Tendai Sipole, I find him just inspiring in terms of thinking about what that mechanism might look like and what I'm going to call the affect, the feeling of it. You know, anyone who's been in that moment where they're taken beyond themselves, where they're, you know, like a jazz musician, which is just suddenly playing things that they didn't even know they could play. You know, when you know, a sports figure just, you know, makes a shot, does something, they say, where did that come from? You know, there's a certain sense that is made available by what's happening around us, by the people that we're involved in. It's not just me and my brothers. It's, you know, all the stuff around us makes possible those moments for us to go beyond ourselves. That's hopeful to me. And then with Sylvia Winter, I mean, she's just so inspiring for me because she really kind of dismantles our way of thinking about our entire modern narrative about ourselves for the last 400 years, and she just puts it right back together again. So, in a certain sense, it's inspiring because there's nothing inevitable about that story we have told about humanism. A lot of people want to get rid of humanism because humanism has so much weight of oppression. You know, yeah, we talk about the human, but which humans are we really talking about? Well, she says it doesn't have to be, but it has to be. And so she gives. So I think there's hope in all three of those, but in different ways. Does that make sense? I got it. Absolutely. I think it's great. Yeah. I love it.
You mentioned Martinique.
Yes.
The World Conference of Mayors met in Martinique in 2008. The mayor there in Martinique served for 51 years. The longest serving mayor that we anywhere. Ain't exactly, that's what I'm saying. We know exactly who it was. The World Conference of Mayors convened there, and I was just telling the mayor of Union Springs, Mayor John McGowan, and all of us, we were there. But he served for 51 years. He was leader not only in Martinique, but also in France. Okay? Okay, another question?
Thank you. I'm glad to listen to what you have just said, and I have a concern. By listening to what I've heard here, it's like black people or African starts with either slavery, colonialism. Today we can talk about neo-colonialism. So I seem to think of what I've heard, that there is no past for the past African people. And this actually gives the right to talk about the African futurism to such a way that we have to build up, whereby there are a lot of facts with the, let me say, how do we call it, pandemic, coronavirus pandemic. Coronavirus pandemic has brought to the knowledge of the world that we should not limit black people only to their culture and music, but in the sense of a science, let's say medical science, there is not much more that is already available, existing, true facts that we have experienced. Not that it just exists now because of the pandemic, but because at least the world was not able again to show what they are capable of. And the black people got conscious of who they are, what they have, what they can do, and they just gave a tip of what can be shown to the world. So if African futurism is just linked to the spiritual aspect of things, what about the macro? What makes me black? Means my physical body, how to keep it alive, how to maintain it, how to treat it, and how to transform and maintain the nurture into which we are living. Thank you.
So let me just respond to that, which I think is a really important comment that you made. My sense of what comes out of the African experience is a very kind of, I do a lot of work in place and space. So what is place? Well, place is the kinds of experiences that people have, the kinds of concepts that they use to make sense out of place. So let me use an example that's not medical related, but another example, a couple of examples actually from Kenya. So in Kenya, you have, they had a banking system that was very difficult to actually access for many people, and you had a landline telephone system that also broke down a lot. And so what you had was the invention of essentially online banking. It's called M-Pesa, and you probably know about it. And so if you're in Kenya, this is the way you exchange money now, right? And it was done originally because people were aware enough of the situation that they were in, and then they had some really incredibly good ideas on how to jump ahead. And frankly, they were basically leading the world. They were leading the world on internet banking when that first came out. Here's another one, Kenya again. There was election violence, and I think it was 2005 in Kenya. And people wanted a real-time way of telling where that violence was and to kind of being able to describe it. And so some smart digital people put together a program called Ushahidi. And so Ushahidi became the potential for people, again, with their cell phones to report in oh, there's violence here. It was like very quick, very real time, so they were able to map that very quickly. Well, this made a huge difference in understanding how that violence was happening, who was motivating it, and it became a tool that was useful in things like the Haiti earthquake, for example. It was used there to figure out where resources were needed. It was used in a lot of other places. Now it's a tool that's become very significant, and it's been copied and modeled and all of that. But again, here are people who look at their situation not as something which is here's the barrier, here's the barrier, here's the barrier, but here's the really clever and interesting solution that nobody else has thought of, and we're in a place to think of it because of our unique situation here. The reason it hasn't been done somewhere else is because people haven't been motivated to do it. Right? But we gotta do something here, and so they came up with it. So that's the really incredible innovation that I've seen. And I've used Canada, but there's lots of others across the continent I think that we can talk about.
Good. Do you have a question or statement? What?
Yes, I have a question. She was there first.
You have a question because we have a time issue here. Go right ahead. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you. My question is, how do you take the whole idea of the isolation, singular organization, individuals who are parallel, who don't interact? How do you what is the conscious peak, maybe, to deal with I lost my word, but it's the isolation is that you think you're minus of only you, no one else. How do you break that up? Come together. And I like your comment on jazz. Very good. I used to play jazz. I played jazz bassoon.
Oh, that's great. That's cool. Your question is so important. And, we see it not just in the African continent, but around the world. I mean, in Japan, we see people who kind of put themselves in their basements and just play video games, for example. Bringing people together is one of the hardest things we can do. I think there's a couple of things you can think about. Doing is usually better than talking. So finding something that people can do together is, like bodies moving together. For whatever reason, going for a walk or, whatever. That can be an open door, I think. I think starting top down is always the hardest way to do it, right? If you say, we should all be together, we should have these principles of agreement, and, we share, well, that's a lot of stuff up here, right? People want to break bread together. They want to do stuff that they care about together. And so I guess my only answer would be, what can we find to start that's practical? And it might have to be the right person to invite somebody into that. It might not be, for example, me to invite somebody, it might be somebody else who has more credibility. But the other thing is scale, right? Are we talking as a large small community, or are we talking as a level of the nation? Right? Because these are problems in both of those scales, but I think the responses would be quite different.
Excuse me, in the interest of time, if you have a question, please give it to us.
Yes.
We need to stay on schedule.
I understand.
Thank you.
I was going to say it in English and French, but I'm going to go in English right away. Okay, so we got Eatonville as a model, and some other example, you gave us some example from the African continent. The question is a city like Eatonville today be transformed from a model that for Afrofuturism and African futurism, we both here, which is the model that we can emulate or we can be inspired by for the future. I think I missed that. I just want to know if you have something for us.
Well,
will it be two different things? The Africans from the continent will do their thing, the Afro will do, or is it some model that Eatonville be that model?
Yeah. Well, so two quick answers. One is that on the questions of Eatonville itself, I will defer to my colleagues Julian Chambliss and Scott French and inline theory and a number of others who know this far better than I do.
Good.
But I think we can look for models elsewhere and adapt things. I mean, you know, Africa and the U.S. are very different in many ways, but not so different in other ways, right? We do face similar challenges sometimes, but it takes people time to each other. Maybe we're trying to get to lunch so we can actually have those talks.
Well, there are a couple of introduced. Dr. Armand, did you have a question? Okay, good. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. What we did not do this morning, why is she in? Okay, so we need to go back to the World Conference. We were sharing this one together. We did not, where did Afterlife come and help me here? We have from the diplomatic corps representing France. Okay, let's do the diplomatic corps. We want to at least acknowledge these people because they are part of our diplomatic corps.
Yes, we actually have Excellency Brigitte Dago, and she couldn't make it today, but she came yesterday to meet with us.
Good.
Excellency Christian in Branson, Honorary Consul for the Embassy of Ireland. Excellency Cecil Tebere, Honorary Consul for the United Republic of Tanzania. Excellency Alicia Kanza, Ambassador of the United Republic of Tanzania in DC. Excellency Queen Master, Dr. Darren Blakely.
She is presently in
Gloria Allen. She's in the continent of Africa. Now we have His Excellency John Armand standing there for Haiti. And for World of Mayor, the only one, Dr. Ife, Excellency William, for World of Mayor.
We make one correction here where it says Queen Mother, Brooklyn, New York. No, she's not from Brooklyn. She is the community mayor of Harlem, New York City. And presently she is on the island of Goree in Senegal. And she has been at the UN for 50 years. Okay? And Reverend, we did not recognize that you weren't earlier, but please stand up. Queen Mother, let's give her a round of applause. Reverend Pam, recently Queen Mother, who is the CEO of Africa's Brain Bank. You'll be hearing more from her as we go along, okay? Now, we've got so many people, as you can see, we planned for 75, and as you can see, we've exceeded that, even for lunch. If you've not registered, we need you to please register. There's also a registration fee. If you can do that, fine, we would appreciate it because we're beyond our numbers that we project. But we're just so delighted to have all of you. So we're going to break now. And if there are those of you who want to take pictures, please let's do this. Now's the time to do this. But lunch will be served in the auditorium right next door. So we want to, it was scheduled to start at 12, but that's what we want to do because we have to stay on schedule. Again, we want to thank all of you all for coming, and we're going to break now. And let's once again give all of our speakers another round of applause. Thank you. We're now going to lunch right next door. Thank you.
Bonjour. Buenos dias. Good morning. I'm Orange County Mayor Jerry Jenkins. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you to the 35th Annual Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities, affectionately known as the Zora Festival. During the festival, I hope you take the opportunity to embrace and celebrate a diverse culture, arts, and delicious cuisine from across the globe. For over 30 years, the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community Incorporated has celebrated the life and legacy of Miss Zora Neale Hurston and the cultural contributions of African heritage. This has made the town of Eatonville and Orange County one of the most visited destinations worldwide. I'm excited about this year's reunion festival and its positive impact on our community. On behalf of the nearly 1.5 million residents who call Orange County home, thank you for your continued investment in the Zora Festival and our community. I wish you all the best for a successful event. Have a safe and prosperous new year.